something important. So Johnny Kent and I have been working together on the research and development, or resource and development, the R&D team, for almost 9 years now, writing books together, which is amazing, and developing learning pathways, developing pretty much all of the learning curriculum material, whatever you want to call it, that we use, our leader lessons and whatnot. Overseeing the mission of the organization as well, together with others. So we do a lot of work together, and a lot of creative work as well, which, as you can imagine, with some strong personalities on this team that we have, we can bump up against each other a lot. So we've done that a good bit. We've learned some really good tools and how to fight well, I think. And we're still learning how to use our conflict to forge intimacy together, and to forge deeper heart-to-heart connection and deeper secure attachment, if we've been throwing that word around a little bit this week, with each other, instead of our conflict blowing us up or sabotaging our organization, even sabotaging ourselves, right? We do that a lot too in our lifetime. So we're hopefully helping each other not sabotage our own journeys as we lean into these things together. So we've been meeting for the last 2 months, every Tuesday and Friday, really, for an hour, to try to talk about some of these things that are getting in our way, so to speak. Does that sound like a good intro?
Yeah, that's great.
Anything else to add?
Well, something I would add, I think one of the things that most people who have grown up in normal Western, maybe American life at least, is that conflict feels like a bad thing. Conflict has all these things that kind of, at a gut level, a visceral level, make us feel fearful. And part of that's no doubt out of a lot of our experience. We have, as you said, Toni, we've seen relationships blow up. We've seen teams blow up. We've seen organizations blow up over unresolvable conflict. And so conflict has this big aura of kind of doom and gloom and bad news about it. But in fact, what if it were possible to imagine that conflict is actually an invitation to something really good, an invitation to grow, an invitation to hear in a new way from God and from the reality that God expresses. And for us, not only individually, but collectively, to be invited into something that's more whole and more attuned with reality. What if we began to see conflict more as opportunity? And I'll just have to say that's been a long journey for me to move from the place of being terrified by conflict to becoming more and more at home. I wouldn't say I'm there, but more and more at home and more hopeful around occasions when conflict arises, because I've had a bunch of experience at this point, and on this team in particular, in seeing how conflict actually does do the things you were saying, Toni. It actually grows us. It actually makes us closer to one another. It actually empowers us to work more effectively and powerfully as a team. And so for whoever's listening, even if it's just us three, but for whoever's listening in on this, one of the things that I think this conversation hopefully will give you is some fresh hope for seeing the power of conflict as a constructive, transformational tool in the hands of God and in the hands of God's people, as we learn how to work with conflict in that way. So yeah, I'm all in on this conversation, excited to see where it'll take us.
I think I'll add one or two other thoughts on that, Toni, and then we'll get into the specifics. So I think working on leadership teams like this, where you're working close together, has some similarities to marriage, right? It's close relationships. And I love the internal family systems people and the way they think about that. In marriage, they say that your spouse is your mentor. That is, God will use this other person and it will feel like a tormentor, but God uses, in my language, God uses to touch on places in my own soul, my internal family, where there's still trauma. It's usually wounds from my past that get triggered that cause me to be defensive, protective, all those kinds of things. And so, as Kent is saying, it's actually, if it's done well, it's actually a good thing, because it's part of the healing process of uncovering those things. Again, internal family systems uses those conflicts as trailheads. They're the beginning place of an internal journey that I need to go on, and you guys help me do that. So that sort of reframes what conflict is all about.
My husband says it will either be this relationship will either be a pathway to growth, or it will be pathology, a pathway to craziness in all of us. So we can either cultivate it to pathway to growth, or it'll become a pathology. Either way, it's a path.
Usually it starts with uncovering some pathology at the beginning.
Mhm.
So
That's right. Well, and I think it's good to say that, like marriage, it also triggers family attachment wounds, like you were saying. And so the only way to let those surface and work through those is high degrees of safety. And so I think that I was thinking through kind of what tools do we have, or what helps us create path towards intimacy, right? Or, as you were saying, transformation, Kent. And we can name some of them here. So what are some of the tools that we use so that, because it doesn't just happen, right? There is no way conflict just naturally becomes a path to intimacy. In my experience, it's never happened. So how do we cultivate that so that it does become that pathway? What are some of the tools you guys have seen us using that you would name?
One of the most important, we haven't done it in this meeting yet, but one of the ways that we create an ecosystem of grace, the very climate in which conflict becomes constructive, is by always making a point to check in with each other. Something about, turning on those gratitude gateways that open up our relational circuits, and hearing each other around that. And then, checking at an emotional level. There's just so much discernment of the body of Christ, to use good biblical language, New Testament language, that goes on when we enter every conversation, significant conversation, taking time to notice who's in the room with me, whether it's a virtual room or a physical room. Who's here? Where are they? What's already up? What's God already up to in the lives that I'm looking at right now? And what is it that God is inviting me, or all of us, to be paying attention to join God in what God wants to do? I think, the safety that gets produced by that is the absolute backdrop. It's the cultural sort of air that we breathe that makes our ability to deal with conflict constructive over time. Over time, we know this is who we are and this is where we are, and that makes it so much easier to deal with whatever conflict does arise. So
wait, Kent, are you saying that our Church of Two practices, that simple structure of checking in and listening, is actually what we use for conflict too? It's just used for everything, isn't it?
Yeah. So I have a question. Are we going to keep on going with this conversation, or are we going to check in?
I think that's a great idea. Thank you so much for reminding us. John and I have been together already once today, and so we're feeling changing.
Yeah. You're already discerning the body. I'm the newcomer here. Yeah.
But thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah. Who wants to go first?
Well, since I've already, so when you're checking in, and especially telling appreciation stories, the nice thing is that you can often use the same one in different settings. It's still what I'm feeling. And I actually start my mornings off. That's part of my time with the Lord, is to sort of check in with him. And so that prepares me. So I don't show up at a meeting thinking, let's see, I wonder where I am. So what I checked in with in a previous meeting was a feeling of amazement and gratitude over our ecosystem of grace. So Luke 10 ecosystem, one of our 5 core values that we talk about in our book. All these gifted people, everybody contributing something, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And so thinking about this relational revolution live and what's happening over these 4 days makes me so grateful for Hillary and Zach, who just have gifts that are way beyond anything I have. I mean, I'm like in kindergarten on technical stuff. And I probably Hillary dreamed this thing up. And I've never heard of a church or a ministry doing what we're doing here, of inviting the world into our inner workings. I just maybe they're doing it. I've just never heard of that. And I think that's so creative. And so I'm so grateful to those 2 guys. I'm sure Tony's had a lot to do with that as well, for putting this together technically, but also then creatively. So checking in, amazed and grateful to be part of an ecosystem like this.
Thanks.
Well, maybe I'll springboard on that one. Yesterday was really a beautiful day for me. Several conversations that I had were so encouraging. One was with Toni, where we got to talk a little bit about dynamic governance, divine governance, and talk and reflect on this amazing ecosystem that God has brought about in Luke 10. And last night we had a meeting with our Eden community. We meet every other week to just kind of talk community business, and we checked in as usual before we got started, and then we got into some really important conversations around housing and all that kind of thing. But what was making me feel so joyful yesterday was 3 women, Toni Daniels and Laura Kellerman and Shannon Kazmarek, 3 women who I've now known in every case at least 10 or 15 years, but who are doing such a brilliant job of creating space around them for people to have deep and meaningful conversations, safe conversations that get really important things done, but at the speed of attachment, at the speed of love. And so, kind of like you're saying, John, I just feel so privileged to be living in a world right now where a lot of my closest relationships are people who get the things that we're talking about this week and have been practicing it for a while. And the goodness and the health of that is just amazing, and it's delightful. And so I feel just deeply grateful today for that.
Thanks. It was stellar. Yesterday was stellar. I'm so excited about that podcast going out. Okay, so as I was preparing for our meeting and I was just asking God for some appreciation, I can't help, and you can see it's just taken over my face. I cannot help but remember us on our writers retreat last year, in October, November, when we were writing this book. And literally, actually, we were writing Jesus Led, and then heard God say, maybe you should write this one instead. And we were like, okay. And then we did it. And which is incredible for us 3 to work that fast. But the memories I have are us going to lunch with Karen, and we're at Dos Margaritas, right? Was what it was called. And our video making out on the lawn, on the front lawn. I think it was the closest thing I saw John to playing. Was making those videos, and you even made some really funny ones that no one will see but us. But
for a contribution to Luke 10, we might be willing to show you some videos of Toni. So let me know.
So just such a delightful time with you guys. And so I'm was remembering that. And of course, I feel honored because you 2 are kind of spiritual giants, and you don't really know that. And I think people don't realize it either, because you're hidden gems that the Lord has been protecting and hiding for some reason. And then you kind of, well, Kent, this is like your thing anyway. Your personality anyway is to kind of subversively influence everything that you're involved in, and no one even knows it's you. You've even subversively influenced John White, which is really incredible.
I like the word, use the word sneaky.
Sneaky. I think that's the only way to influence John White is in a sneaky way. But so it's an honor to be with both of you. And I still pinch myself that I get to be in the rooms with you and write these books together and do things like that. I don't know how I got here. So I'm just thankful that that I get to be here. So that reminded me of that. Thank you. All right. Do we want to just lay out a few other things that might come up in our conversation that are tools that we use, so that if we throw it out there, it's already been kind of talked about a little bit, so people aren't surprised?
Yeah.
I'll make a couple of comments. One is the whole checking in. I just want to use the word cumulative. I believe the value of checking in is cumulative over time. Do it once, it's a really good thing. But as you do it with the same people over a long period of time, it builds, it deepens attachment as you do that. It's almost imperceptible, but there's something long-term about that that's really important. A second tool that we have found to be really, really helpful is what often is called speaker listener. Speaker listener is a way of slowing down a conversation. I usually get in trouble when we're moving too fast. My brain takes me places that it's not good for me to go. So speaker listener basically says, instead of both people kind of talking at the same time, you designate one person as the speaker. We say that person has the floor, and the other person is the listener. And the listener only has one job, and that is to listen to the speaker and to repeat back, restate, reflect, however you want to say that, what that person is saying. I think of it as a feedback loop. So here's the speaker and here's the listener. The speaker is sending a message over to the listener. The listener then sends that message back, sort of restates it, ending with a question. Is that right? Did I get you correctly? Speaker can then say, yeah, that's exactly it. Or they can say, it's not quite it, it's more like this, and they send that back. And so you go through the feedback loop until the speaker can say, yeah, I think that's really it. That's what I'm trying to say, both on the content level and the emotion level. We're listening for both. By separating those two roles out, speaker and listener, it makes it much easier to do a good job really listening. And then, of course, you can trade places. And so the other person can be the speaker, they can have the floor, and so on. So we've been practicing that for some time. But we've learned a new thing, I think, about speaker listener in the last maybe few weeks. And that is that we need to slow it down even more than we have in the past. And so we decided that we would actually take one whole session for Toni to be the speaker and me to be the listener. And I'm writing notes and I'm reflecting back. And then I can take 3 or 4 or 5 days to reflect on that, come back to her and say, let me just say it again. Here's what I'm hearing. And then I can take the floor and she will be just the listener. And that's been a huge help to us. One other thing I'll say about speaker listener, by calling speaker listener, I think we're just describing the mechanics of it. One person's speaker, one person's a listener. I'm beginning to call it by a new name, and that is compassionate listening. So you can get the mechanics right without really getting the heart of it right. I have violated that many times myself, and so framing it that way is a way of listening compassionately to the other person really makes a big difference. So
these are structures that y'all are talking about that we're putting into place to kind of slow down the atomic bomb that could explode, right? To kind of bring down the temperature. And time is crucial. It gives us the space to look at ourselves, to listen to Jesus more, to listen even in my own head to the other person during the days that we're not meeting, as opposed to just responding off the cuff. It really, allows us to get God's perspective, I think, on that as well. So those spaces have been crucial. And we noticed that the only way one can give space like that is because there's already some level of healthy attachment or trust that's built up enough, that I know I can take that space and it's not going to jeopardize the relationship at all. So that's been really helpful. So those are great structures. We have a few more like I statements and pauses, timeouts. I need to take a break and go get myself together for a minute because I can't stay with y'all. And all that is in great communication courses. If anyone's interested, they can ask where to find some of that stuff.
Toni, one more thing I'll add there. Having a third person,
Yeah.
especially if it's a really hot topic, can be really helpful. So you and I get to practice. Keep your listener a lot, and Kent gets to watch and coach us in that and notice where we're kind of getting off base. That's occasionally he gets in the middle of it, but really but having that third person can be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And on the timing thing, you mentioned it, both of you mentioned it in different ways, but I would just say that is such a huge piece of this. Everything in me, at least, wants to get things resolved, wants to get them fixed as fast as possible, wants to press on to solution. And I think what we've been learning is when we're dealing with really intense and deep things, that is simply impossible. You can't do this kind of deep work quickly. And so, as you said, Toni, sometimes we'll just call a timeout in the middle of a conversation. And you're really good about calling yourself out, saying, I am in a place right now where if I go further, it's not going to be constructive. Give me 3 minutes, give me 5 minutes, whatever. And that's so powerful because that's attending to our own truth and our own experience of whatever the situation is. And it enables us to kind of get back into the conversation where we're listening instead of just reacting. But as John said too, to settle into the reality that intimacy grows at the speed of attachment, right? The pathway to intimacy is mutual self-disclosure, and we can only do that at the pace that we can receive one another where we are. And so sometimes, again, when we're dealing with really big issues, it is super helpful to say, okay, here's some things that I really need for you to hear from me. And I don't need your response right now because you're going to need some time to process this. But I want to be sure that we take all the time we need for you to hear me out, and that's a great gift that everybody in the process gives, to make sure that there's space to hear the other person out. And then, in our case, sometimes we've got an hour to give to it, and then we really do need to take a 3 or 4 day break and let that person kind of absorb, process, and begin to formulate how do they want to respond to that. So that's new territory for me. But what I can say is that when we do that, all the parties involved mature in profound ways. All the parties involved grow in understanding one another. But also, for me, it's been hugely self-revelatory. Even when you guys are working through your stuff and I'm the listener, I'm seeing things that you're sharing that apply directly to me. And so if we're willing to slow it down, as John said, and then slow it down further, I think the rewards are great.
It's beautiful. Thank you. So that structure is those structural elements help slow things down and help us keep it safe and keep the person priority, the relationship priority, instead of being right. And then I'm going to name 3 things quickly because I want to jump to our process. So you're going to have to look them up on your own, but I'm going to throw them out there for you. The Enneagram is something that we fiercely use, and it has been so helpful. I think it has saved our relationship, honestly. IFS, internal family systems, work in all of our parts, and the Emmanuel approach and Emmanuel prayer. 3 tools or languages that we are becoming fluent in because it helps us understand each other better, understand ourselves better. And some people hate the Enneagram because they think they're put in a box, but that's not the point of the Enneagram. For me, the Enneagram reveals the box that we have already been in and that now we can break out of. But it also helps. John and I are both very aggressive types. We're aggressive personalities. And if we did not appreciate the strengths of each other, we would destroy each other. And so the Enneagram has helped me appreciate him in ways that I never would have on my own. And I think vice versa, right? And it's also helped me identify my weaknesses so that I can protect him and my organization from my weaknesses and actually mature in them, because that's an adult role, learning to protect others from myself. And so that's what the Enneagram has done for me that has been incredibly helpful. And we might throw some of those terms around here today. So I just wanted to give a heads up. It's all on the internet. You can go find it. There's tons of free stuff out there. But we definitely use it probably every time we meet.
It gives language to describe what's going on.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the Enneagram is also the way you manifest is birthed out of your pain, out of a trauma that you've had, or the way you interpreted the world. And that brings compassion for me to know why John is the way he is, or for him to understand why I'm the way I am, helps us have more compassion towards each other as well. Okay. So we have been processing conflict for months now. I would love for us to just debrief where we are in this process, because we're not done with it. And how we realized we had a problem. I think that's fascinating, because, that's the first step, right? Is to go, we have a problem. So from each of our perspectives, and I don't know who goes first, but I would love to just kind of think, how did we realize we had a problem? And we haven't rehearsed this. We don't know what each other's going to say. This is kind of our first debrief on this. So how did we know we had a problem, guys?
Well, I would be glad to start at least one part of my place. So I would say, well, Enneagram wise, I'm probably an 8, which is often called a challenger or a protector. And I'm highly oriented towards seeing threats, seeing problems. In gifting, I have a sort of a prophetic gifting as part of me. And so I can read, and I think a specific situation without naming names, that I read something that someone had written, some well-known author that we've appreciated, and wrote something, and I kind of felt this thing rising up within me of saying, I think he's totally wrong about that. I think he is really off base, and I totally disagree with this, and I think it's actually dangerous. And so I'm kind of going on about this, and Toni is getting more and more upset with me about this. And
but in the past, you wouldn't have known. You would not have known. That was last week. I'm talking about, how did we know we had problems at the 2 months ago, 3 months ago? How did you? One of us said we need to start talking, and I don't know which one of it was. Kent, do you remember? I remember my part of it, but
Well,
I don't know.
Why don't you prompt us a little bit? You have something specific in mind.
So we were in a pressure cooker because we had some grant opportunities come up, which triggered mission stuff and triggered all kinds of stuff, and we didn't have a lot of time to talk through it. And when I get a plan, sometimes I want to run with it if there's a deadline, especially. So I will tend to just kind of lead. And sometimes I feel like John stands in my way. And so that was going on. And I'm like, why is he contrary? Why is he constantly criticizing me? Which a 3 on the Enneagram, which is a performer. I like my supervisors to appreciate me and like what I'm doing. I don't like them to criticize me. So I was feeling criticized constantly during January and February. And yet I felt like I was doing a really good job. So I'm like, I don't understand why he's criticizing me. So that was one kind of manifestation that I went, what's going on here that John's criticizing me a lot in my mind? So he must be upset with me. There's something going on. I've done something to make him mad. So that was my first red flag. Second red flag, which is fascinating. Notice that my red flag is that I think he's upset that I've done something wrong. Okay. That just tells you everything about me, because I was completely suppressing any feelings I might have had of hurt or pain because I suppress my emotions. So when I stopped to reflect on what I might have done to make John upset, I realized that and we were having meetings, and anger would start to seep out of me in meetings. And I said a few things to John in some key meetings that probably disrespectful, and hurt his feelings, right? And I would leave that meeting, and I was very well aware of what I had done, because I don't want to do things wrong. I like to do it right all the time. So when I leave, I go, oh, I really said some things that could have hurt his feelings. Why did I say that? Like, what's going on there? Right. So that's when I started doing some self-reflecting and realizing that I had some hurt and some anger that I had been stuffing for about a year and not talking about at all, because I didn't want to talk about it because I was afraid. So back to that fear that conflict could erupt. Maybe he won't listen. Maybe he'll be like other relationships in my life who turned it on me, blamed me. So those fears were there. But the red flags were me disrespecting him and him criticizing me. So I'm like, okay, guys, in the future, if at any moment you become critical of me, John, that's a red flag. Or if I become disrespectful, boy, we need to stop immediately and go, okay, what's going on? All right, that was my point of view. Kent, did you notice all of that? And what tipped you off to go, yeah, y'all need to talk?
Yeah, I mean, and listeners will appreciate this if we broadly say that the life we've been invited into is a life of love, and we find ourselves in relationships where people are not loving one another in the ways that they're communicating, then obviously there's something that really does need addressing. And so the clear emotional level of discomfort that was coming up in some of those meetings made it clear this is a time to pay attention. So just to give you a compare and contrast, I have been in so many church staff meetings, organizational meetings, academic meetings where that kind of thing is not addressed until the rupture is irreparable. And so I think, the good thing is that, in all of those contexts, we would have said we are seeking to be God's people. We're seeking to live lives of love. And yet at the most foundational level, our core relationships, even in the leadership, we're often not reflecting that love at all, especially as we were relating to one another. So, I think to have the capacity to notice it, and then better yet, to have the capacity to say, and we're not just going to notice it, we're going to do something about it. We're going to create the space to really take the deep dive into this stuff and deal with it. That for me is one of the refreshing and beautiful things about this relationship.
One other comment there, Kent, is what often causes us not to notice it is we have a job to do here. We have a task. We have a mission. We're doing something important for God. We press through this. Let's keep moving on this thing. Instead of saying, wait a minute, the relationships are more important than the task.
Yeah.
Actually having to live that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, the conflict drains a lot more energy than actually working through it. I was much worse the 6 months I was ignoring it and it building up inside of me than the last 2 months where we've actually been talking about it. Yeah. That's released tons of energy and growth. So it was much harder to avoid it than to lean into it. John, were you noticing those red flags, or was it more you did notice that we hurt your feelings? I think that was Kent and I both hurt your feelings in one meeting, and Kent came back around and said, I think we hurt your feelings. And so that felt like maybe the triggering meeting where maybe you even said that, yeah, I think there's some things wrong here. And that's where we started to talk, possibly.
I think that's right. And the way that tends to come out in me is I get angry. So I grew up with a father who wasn't a very good listener. So there's some trauma inside of me about not having a voice. And so when I feel like I don't have a voice, I get angry, and that doesn't help anything. But noticing that is sort of my cue that that's what's going on inside.
I think it's important for me too to say that when when we all realized the red flags were there and we needed to talk, it takes a lot of maturity to use the silence and the time away to actually look at yourself instead of forming a case to take down the other person. And I think the first days when I was pulling aside, I literally was journaling every day. And I was journaling about all the things that John had done to hurt me and make me mad, because it was the first time I was actually acknowledging that I was mad, right? I had been suppressing that. I had actually been suppressing it, doing appreciation for John, recognizing all his strengths and trying to do all this great mental work that looks so healthy to try to keep him in an honorable place in my mind. But at the same time, I was suppressing that I was hurt. And so that's how it kept seeping out. And I was trying to keep it in a box, but it wouldn't stay there. And so actually acknowledging the box took a few days for me. And had I engaged John during those days, it would have been terrible, because I just would have gone off. I really would have in really bad ways. So I ended up instead asking Jesus about all of this and what he wanted me to know. And I sensed him say, you need to get a coach, because you're up against some really big stuff in your leadership and in who you are and moving forward from here out. So get a coach. And I was like, okay. So thankfully had Jesus as my coach. And then I had a good friend meet with me once. And then I actually hired a coach finally. And in that time, for me, realized where I had been wrong in all of this, and realized that I had been suppressing my feelings, that I had been treating John as if he's not capable of handling the hard things. Because the fact that I'm hiding it from him and not wanting to share with him that he's upset me means I don't think he's big enough to handle it. I don't think he's strong enough to take criticism or constructive feedback. And so that wasn't serving him or loving him at all. And so that thankfully I could then move into why do I do that? And it comes from my dad as well, and my parents, and the way I was raised and how I reacted and responded to that attachment. And so opened up a whole world for me of healing and growth, realizing some of those things and being able to lead with that instead of leading with all the things that make me mad about you, which was a totally different way to start, right? So how was that for you, John, when I showed up that day and you had no idea what was going to come out of me? Yeah. And I started with, this is what happened with me and my dad. This is how I dealt with it. I shut down emotionally. I pull back. I try to take it on myself. I try to handle it myself, and I just don't bother you with it. But I end up separating a little bit from you. And I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, you were very vulnerable that day. And that touched my heart. It softened me to see you doing that. And I realized that you were being a really good model for me, and that's the place I needed to go. You used the phrase build a case. And I think also you said in the past that the thing that keeps you from going there is the fear that you're going to be harassed, criticized, shamed, blamed, all that kind of stuff. I have a part of my internal family that I call the prosecuting attorney. And he also at the same time has been getting busy building his case. And so, you lie awake in bed at night, well, I'm going to say this, and deal with this on. And so your model helped. It also helped that I could tell that prosecuting attorney, there will be an opportunity for you to share your perspective. It's like I can help him kind of quiet down, calm down. It's going to be okay. You don't have to protect me. You don't have to defend me. And when I can do that, then I can enter into that conversation with you where you shared how you were feeling, places where I hurt you, and I could just stay in that role and really hear you. So those things helped me in the process.
I'll let you share, Kent, too, but I want to just say that when you did that, John, when you listened and you didn't become a defense attorney or prosecuting attorney, when you just listened to me, I remember crying by the end, and you guys asking me, what are you feeling, Kent? What are you feeling, Toni? And I was like, wow. I mean, just the fact that you would listen, that you would listen, that you would hear me, that you would value my process, that you would value me in the middle of this. That felt very formative and healing for me. And that's when I realized, I think I have a container here that I'm going to get to grow in. Like, I'm really going to get to grow. And wow, that is incredible. It's incredible. So
that's the compassionate listening. And for me, I almost am aware they have to go to a different place in my brain. There's the place, the prosecuting attorney. There's another place that really is a good listener. And if I can shift over to that, that is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And back to one of our earlier points that I think what you all have been saying illustrates so powerfully is the good Holy Spirit is the one who is always at work to bring the shalom of God into the community of God. And the timing on all these conversations was impeccably perfect, and it was often delayed. So, we had planned to meet, pretty regularly, weekly, if not multiple times a week. But there were stretches in there where, for various reasons, we couldn't all get together. Schedule-wise, you guys both had significant health issues at points along the way, and all of that slowed this down further. And so there were stretches where we'd have a meeting and then we'd have to wait 10 days or something before we got to kind of pick things back up. And in my former world, in my former life, I would have been so anxious through all that. We've got to get this fixed. We got to get on with this. But because we have the Holy Spirit as our coach and guide in all of this, I think the timing has been just right. There were pauses when there needed to be pauses for us to get past some of those emotional humps, where we were not ready to really share. And had we just been following some kind of a rigid schedule and unopen to things happening as they needed to, it wouldn't have worked. There's no formula for this except listen to Jesus and let him lead. And as much as we would like to have a simple handy dandy way to fix all possible problems, the truth is that the only universally effective answer to shalom is God, the source of all peace.
So where did any of us ever have this modeled for us, right? In my home growing up, this kind of thing was not modeled. It's, what my dad said went. That's the end of the argument. There's no more conversation about what I said. And so, there are ways in which, when Toni, you and I trigger each other, it's almost like I'm back being 14 years old. And all this old stuff is kind of coming on.
And I am too. And there's two teenagers going at it. And Kent's like, oh, here they go.
We have one adult in this group, don't you think? But and that's my hope for.
No, he might go hide under the table a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I think one of the great potentials of the Luke 10 community, that it is made up of a lot of people who really have made significant progress towards being elders, being spiritual grown-ups. And we have a community where we're beginning to learn how to do this kind of thing. And I think the way that we learn it best, read a book on conflict management. But when you actually get to see it, when you get to be in the middle of that, Toni modeled vulnerability for me. And that's more powerful than any book would be.
Yeah. As you're talking, it occurs to me, there's like phrases going through my head that we use a lot that help me continue valuing the time involved, the process involved, right? Because I am a doer, an activator. So I do have to reframe, because I could get like, oh, we're not getting anything done. We've got so many things to do. What are we doing? We're just talking. So I wanted to say some of those helpful things that we share. One of them is we say and I know this comes from Fierce Conversations or one of these great books, but a healthy organization is defined by how many difficult conversations it has, that you can almost gauge how healthy an organization is by that. And so that comforts me. I go, well, we must be healthy because we got so many of these. So we're doing good. So reframes, right? Trust the process. What Kent was saying, you just trust the process. If we get delayed, we're going to listen to Jesus even more. What do you want me to know because of this delay? This is good, probably. And you have work you're doing. Sometimes I'm praying, God, convict John, because thank God, give another week to convict him. Terrible, but then he convicts me in the process. I'm like, wait a minute, I wasn't thinking that. The other one I love to tell myself often is, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And it's always better together. It's always better. And I use past experiences of us rewriting Church 101 together, writing leader teams together, writing the first one, Joy Field together, it's always better together. I mean, I would not have written those books without y'all. It would have been terrible. So that helps me remember to stay in it with you. Also, when we are at peace, when John and I are at peace, and Kent too, when we have trust, everything gets done easier. Everything, it's like on speed dial, and we just get things done. Whereas when we're not at peace, these things are exhausting and take time. And so I really have that hope too, that, we're going to get to writing. And when we do, it's going to go like that, because our hearts are going to be united. We're going to have trust with each other. We're not going to be sabotaging each other, because we're united in our heart. And so that hope is there for me as well. That helps me stay in it.
To use brain science language, our relational circuits are on, and when they're off, it's hard to get anything done, right? And so that's got to be the starting place. One other comment, Toni, on what you said, going back to marriage, I think it was John Gottman who talks about rupture and repair in any marriage, or really any relationship. And he said the definition of a really healthy marriage is not that you never have any ruptures. That's just almost not possible, but it's your capacity to repair the ruptures that really is the mark of a healthy relationship, maturity. I think it's true in marriage, and I think it's also true in leadership as well.
It's beautiful. And the last thing that I had noted on my paper that I think is important to say for me in this process is, we all three have to be willing to do our own work, to look at ourselves, to say, God, how do I protect John and Toni, if I'm Kent, from my weaknesses as a 9? How do I protect Luke 10 from my weaknesses? And John has to say the same thing about the 8, and I have to say the same thing about the 3. And, I think that is, I'm learning through right now, through this 2-month conversation for me, I'm going, you know what, if I am constantly wanting people to look at my benefits as a 3 and my value as a 3, then I'm not doing my work, because it's not y'all's job to see me and see the value I bring, although you do, and I love that. But it's my job, one, to let Jesus see me and be proud of me and be happy with Jesus. So find my peace with him, that he can see me even when y'all don't. And God, what are my weaknesses, and how do I protect y'all from them? That's my work. Y'all can't do that work for me. And if I don't do that work, I'm going to sabotage and destroy this relationship too. And so that's been huge for me. And last year I started that with our teams, because I realized there's 2 ways my weaknesses will come. And one is I rush my teams and I push them too hard and too fast. So last year started asking them for feedback on, am I pushing you too hard and too fast every meeting, just to try to protect them from me. And then God revealed last month the second one with you guys, and that's hiding my emotions and not showing up with them. And I was like, oh man, now I got to work on that one too. So thank you very much. My 2 biggest weaknesses as a 3 are just being drawn out in community and given so much opportunity.
So good. Something you said there, Toni, a little earlier that sparked a thought that I think might be helpful to say broadly. I think Scott Peck maybe was the one who originally talked about communities forming initially at the pseudo level. We put our best personhood forward, and a lot of organizations never get past pseudo, in my experience, until they blow up. They kind of rock along, letting other people see only the things they think are acceptable. And, that distance from reality ultimately comes back to bite them in a big way. But if they do start getting real, then you start getting into the chaos. You get into the conflict and the chaos. What some authors talk about is the storming stage.
Storming,
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah.
So, and then the chaos, it's terrifying because you don't know what's going to happen here. It could blow up, and a lot of times, in my experience, it does blow up. And people just don't have the maturity, the breadth of perspective to keep the relationship bigger than the issues that are surfacing. But if you get deep enough into chaos, you ultimately come to emptiness, where you realize, in Peck's typology there, that I cannot change this other person. I can't make this reality different than it is. I have to let go of my demands for this thing to look like I expected it to look. And at that point, if we're still together in the emptiness stage, then there's a possibility for us to really begin to see and hear one another as we actually are, and then move into true community, where we're working and walking alongside of each other as we truly are. And of course, it would be wonderful if that just happened once, right? And then you're there, you're good. But
I was about to say, how many times does this have to go?
Our experience is that process just keeps rolling, right?
It's a spiral. Is that what you're saying?
On rolling. We get to keep rocking on down the road as we become more and more aware of how we're different and how we see things through different lenses. But so back to our conversation yesterday, Toni, I think when we're operating in a divine governance ecosystem where Jesus is Lord, not just in word, but in fact, so we will follow Jesus as we discern the leading of his Spirit together, that very un-American but very Christian calling that's at the center of our life in Christ. If we discern the leading of Jesus together, we will get done the things that Jesus is doing, because Jesus is Lord and Jesus is leading by his Spirit. I've seen lots of groups get lots of things done that had little to nothing to do with what Jesus was actually doing, because they weren't divinely governed. And so I think the ability to deal with conflict constructively is one of the most powerful and important subsets of what it is to have a whole ecosystem of God's grace that is operating in the beauty of the Spirit and in the differentiation of all those parts that God has called together to do the thing that God is doing here and now.
Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you guys for doing your work and helping me rewrite my history to some degree and rewire my brain for healthy attachment. So thank you.
Same for me. It's healing old wounds, old trauma.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're growing up into this thing that we've been invited into, which is amazing.
About time, Kent.
And still a journey.
All right. Well, we are down to 4 minutes, and Kent and I will jump on our other call. But for our closing round and listening round, if y'all are out there listening to this, if anyone was there, or you're hearing this on a recording later, just take a minute, take 30 seconds and listen. God, do I have community like this? Do I belong to leaders, other peers that can form community with me that would help me grow as a leader, as a person, as a human, as a parent, as a daughter? And if I don't have that, what do you want me to know about that? Because I'm sure he wants to put you in some type of community like that. And maybe you're out there going, wow, this is incredible, and I want to see this reproduced all over the planet. And you want to become a strategic partner with Luke 10 to help us do that. So please, if that's you, the website has our giving information there, and we would love to have you part of the team to fuel and fund this movement. 30 seconds, guys, and we'll let them listen, and we'll think about our closing round. What do we take away from our time today? Come on. All right. I think the weightiness of this conversation hits me, and it's our norm now for 10 years, but I can't escape right now realizing how far from normal it is for most people to have this this gift. So our whenever we go to Luke 10 conferences, people are like, can you and John argue in front of us? And I'm like, no. Maybe one day we'll give you all a live demonstration. But people need to see it. They want to see it modeled. They want to see what this looks like and how this works. And so people haven't seen it, like you said, Kent. They don't have an imagination for it, haven't seen it, and so the weightiness of this is just on me, and I'm thankful again for you guys.
So for me, I feel like it's God's sense of humor. This has almost nothing to do with the thing we're talking about, but he's taking me back to the mid 1970s. So I'm a new evangelical Presbyterian pastor, very conservative church, Toni, that didn't believe that women should be elders.
Oh goodness!
And that was a hot
Wow!
Right?
Wow!
So I feel like Jesus is sort of laughing at me now and saying, you as an example, but I think there are many, many women in Luke 10 who are fully themselves, who lead just in the same way as any man would lead. And I just feel like the Lord is kind of smiling at where I was and where I am today.
Thank you. And that's so hard to believe, John, because you create so much space for women to lead. And I have grown so much as a leader because of you. So thanks for your prophetic spirit there coming out of that church for sure.
Aren't we glad that wisdom in the Proverbs is a woman guiding us along? Well, yeah, I feel so privileged to be a part of this community. I feel satisfied. I feel seen, heard, understood, celebrated, and I feel like I have companions on the journey, and that's good. When all that's there, it's good.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Love you guys. Kent and I are going to hang out here. John, you can if you want. You probably don't want to.
I'm leaving.
Bye for now.
All right. Thank you. Do you know who all is supposed to be in this meeting? I know Jay and Shannon. Sarah Harrington. All right.
I'm going to let you
Yes, go.
I'm going to take a quick break here. I'll be right back.
There we go. All right. We are going to take a 2-minute break, and we'll be right back.